Jayant Chaudhary, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure to be here, Mateo.
Jayant, today we're going to talk about leadership in technology, transformation, some of the amazing things that you have done throughout your career. But let's start with the basics for the benefit of the audience. Tell us, what do you do today for a living?
I solve technology problems for companies that have been blocked in delivering their business value. That is a good description of what I do. As we get further into this discussion, I'll explain what that means because it can mean different things for different clients. Today, for example, I work with a company called SURREAL, which is where we met each other, Mateo. And for them, what I do is I make sure that they're able to deliver to their enterprise clients metaverse-based experiences for training, for marketing, really high value, very visible experiences that they were having problems delivering before I joined them.
Very good. So much value to unpack there on helping companies remove the obstacles so that they can achieve their objectives, right? And I'm already thinking about questions for that. But let's go back a little bit on memory lane. And how did you get started in technology? When was that? How long ago was that?
This was back in 1989, so it's been quite a while. My first job was shortly after, but the very first time I touched a computer was back in 1989. I didn't grow up in the US. I grew up in India, and then I went to England to study. So I was doing a master's degree there. And my initial idea was that I want to go into business management. So my first degree was management, but with a focus on information systems. And at the time, information systems were quite, I would say, what you would consider old-fashioned. They didn't really have a good user interface. It was difficult to interact with them. And for the very first time, I touched a system called Lotus 123, which was probably the best way to describe that would be kind of a spreadsheet. What you do with Excel today, you could do with Lotus 123 then. So you had macros, you had programming that you could do, but it provided good business value. I touched it as part of my management degree, and I was hooked because I realized I was able to do things that I had never thought possible before. So that's where it started.
How do you feel today? Because right now, with everything going on, AI and everything, it feels like I look at my children and some of the things they didn't see, right? I was young, but I do remember the birth of internet. I do remember how things changed, and I feel the same way right now with AI, right? It feels like we are living through such a transformation. Bring us back in memory to 1989. There's no mobile phones. Internet is barely a thing. It's only getting started.
Yes.
There's fax machines everywhere. People smoke at the office. It's like a different time altogether, right?
Completely different. Yes, and the concept of a mini computer, what we call a PC today, is also very different because number one, they were expensive, which is why universities used to be given computers by large companies like Sun Microsystems at the time, HP, and they all had operating systems. Windows was just barely a thing, if I remember correctly at the time. It was just coming out at the end of that. So the first time I touched a computer, my operating system was OS2. It wasn't Windows. And so things were very different, obviously. So what was happening at that point, I think, was the miniaturization of technology had begun. And it started in earnest a couple of years after that. But at the time, it was difficult to get access to computing power. You had, the equivalent of what would really be, I would say, less powerful than a Raspberry Pi in a huge case at the time, and that was state of the art. So what we were learning though at the time, and it's kind of the consistent thing has always been that you're trying to solve a business problem, right? And if you can create a process around it, and you can create something that can be replicated through a process over and over again, then you can hand that over to a computer, to something that performs that logic for you based on rules. And that's exactly what's happened with AI today. So if you look at what AI is doing and is great at doing that for you, is a great example of that is ChatGPT. ChatGPT is artificial intelligence, but that intelligence is based on what humans did and created in terms of questions and answers and knowledge that it went and looked at. And then there's a team of people assisted by computer programs that started attaching weightage to what answers were correct for what questions. And that's how they train the model. That's how those models are trained. So eventually what's happened now is it looks like it's artificial intelligence, but it still came from very non-artificial human intelligence. And that's going to continue to be the case. And one of the things that I've noticed again is when you create images or videos, because that's part of what we do at Surreal and a couple of the other companies I'm involved with, AI can do things that would take my team of designers or my artists weeks or months to do. It does it really quickly if you have the computing power. But you still have to take a look at that and find out, for example, if people have eyes that are not quite right, if they are breaking rules, like if they are moving animated avatars, for example, moving through a scene, then you have to see whether the feet are on the right side, so the right foot is not attached to their left leg, that kind of thing. And those are things that just, it'll keep getting better and better. So now you already have these idea of deep fakes, people creating systems that completely take over someone's identity and make you think that you're looking at a different person than who you're looking at. So again, the computing power has increased. Where you look at business benefit, that has obviously, there's more and more business benefit. You can replicate, you can process a lot more. But still, you've got to come up with, as humans, you've got to come up with where you apply it. And then
Right.
that's where you see most companies beginning to do a lot of great work, because you apply it to image processing, you apply it to financial fraud detection. That's how you get real business value out of that.
And that goes back to what you were saying about how you got started with computers, and something that didn't really change from then, which is you are at the end of the day solving a business problem with a process, with an if-then type situation that computers can do better than we do. Is that how you fell in love with technology? You were coming at it with a business mindset and you realize, hey, these are machines that can really help us solve problems in an automated, repeatable, better way.
Yeah. Yeah. What ended up happening was, when I started out as a programmer, and coincidentally, my first ever job was to do natural language processing. I used to ingest a lot of data, English passages, and I was working for a company that's quite well known. It's called Mitsubishi.
Right.
So I was doing a research project for them. And the idea was to take a look at large passages of English and then try to not just determine the meaning, because the words have meaning, but context also has meaning, right? So you have to understand, in a 20 sentence passage, what a word means can be very different based on where it appears within that
Right.
passage.
Right.
So my first ever paid engagement using computers was to do what AI is doing today, which is to understand, this is back in 1990, to understand how to get context, not just meaning, but context and meaning out of language. So that's where I began to understand that it's not just data processing. It is data processing in service of a bigger business purpose. And the bigger business purpose is, sometimes it is just faster data processing, which is great. I mean, if you can do that, obviously there's business value to it. But at other times, for example, you do things to get information that allow you to make better decisions for your business. A great point here is, for example, business intelligence data, where what you do is you look at data that's come up to you from past behavior, past history, uh, data that is historical, and you take that and you extrapolate based on parameters that allow you to say, if these things happened and other things that are not within my control happen, then this is what scenarios would look like. So then you do some modeling based on that, and that allows small and large companies to come up with ideas for them to succeed in the marketplace. For example, I'll give you a pretty fascinating statistic. Some of the most important information that is processed today is processed by a company called the Weather Channel. The Weather Channel is owned by, if I remember correctly, is owned by IBM. And the reason that's very important is because the Weather Channel has apps and a lot of sensors that are distributed across people's phones, people's devices at home. So it's collecting data about temperature, about local conditions from all over the US and sometimes all over the world. It's a great place, it's a great system for you to bring in all of that data and determine how the weather is going to, for example, affect a baseball game that's going to take place 15 days from now, right? You can extrapolate, you can make some forecasts, and now how does that commercially, how does that make sense? Obviously, the Weather Channel is selling that information, selling that expertise, but now you can say it's going to be a rainy day and people are going to be out in the cold rain, right? Because they're devoted to the sport. They'll still be out there. The stadium should have maybe 10 times the normal jackets, the jackets that it sells inside with branding. They will sell out that day based on what's going to happen. So it's that kind of thing where you do things that are completely disconnected. When you bring them together, you provide real business value.
It's amazing. It's really amazing to see that you were working on stuff that there's so much talk about it today and so much value being added, and you were doing this 30 something years ago. So it's amazing. Tell us more about how you transitioned to management, right? So you were working for Mitsubishi, you were an individual contributor at this time, right?
I was, yes.
Did you always want to transition into management, and how did that happen?
It happened. I believe it happened because I think the most important skill any person can have is to be able to communicate well. It doesn't matter what your job is. Obviously, Albert Einstein, if he were not able to communicate, he would still be a genius and everyone would still know what he did. But once you have these ideas, once you're trying to take a project or even a skill and help somebody, it is very important for you not just to explain what you're doing or communicate what you're doing. It's very important for you to take what the other person or other people are trying to tell you, synthesize that, and then be able to bring that back in a way that you understand easily, that they confirm you have understood. And then say the same thing, do the same thing with them, which is don't speak to business users in technology terms. It's a very, I would almost say it's almost unprofessional to do that, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to tell them to understand your language when the business users are driving the process, they're driving the project. But the business value doesn't come from software. The business value doesn't come from your writing code. Business value comes from what a business is trying to solve a problem with. And you are part of that tool set. You are part of the set of people, software processes, hardware that taken together can create an optimized solution for that business problem. So if you can communicate well, what ends up happening is most programmers are uncomfortable communicating, in my personal experience. And most programmers don't like the stress of having to be responsible for the delivery of projects where they are not the individual contributor. So you have a lot of very competent people who program, they're very good at delivering what they're asked to. But when it gets to the point of, on a group of 200 of 300 people, you have no idea what the graphic design team is doing, but their design is what's going to be the front end for the system that you're building for this enterprise company. It's very difficult to get people to understand that everything is related. That part is where I realized slowly that I was able to communicate well. And the reason I realized that was because my clients at the time, people that I worked with, people that I worked for, used to come back and tell me that we prefer to work with you because you're able to express your ideas and you're able to understand what you're saying and express it to your team members. So that's how it started. And once it starts, once you put yourself in the position of, kind of the one throat to choke, then people just realize that, this guy was able to deliver once, let's try him again.
And so when you do that, you went to from programmer to VP to CTO, and then you start leading leaders, right? So
Yes.
question to you, communication and communicating well, both speaking and listening, being able to understand the big picture, the holistic approach, and then synthesize and then understand the little parts, super important, right? Is that something that you were able to coach to different leaders that work with you, or do you find it that that's something that they have or not have? Is it coachable? That skill, is it coachable or not?
It is coachable to people who come to me asking to become better. So typically the way it happens right now is I have a business called eProxim. So when I went through the cycle that you described, which was I used to work as an individual contributor, I became manager of people, went from programmer to director to VP to CTO. I used to be able to step into what I would call a consulting role. I'd do that for a couple of years through my company called eProxim. And then I would step out and step into a kind of a 1-year role or 2-year role with a company. Could be a startup, could be a Fortune 50 company. What I was noticing then was I'd go into these organizations or I'd start a project for one of these organizations, and they would always have people who were finding it difficult to get good results on projects. So my expertise became, I realized my expertise became walking into these fairly complex technology projects, which were being led by people who knew how to solve the technology problems, but the projects were failing. And the reason they were failing was because it's difficult to manage a project, even if you know what the answers are. So very often when you go into these projects, what you'll find is something that should have taken a year to implement has been going on for 2 or 3 years. And the people who are paying for that project are exasperated. That's usually how I come in, by the way. They will bring me in as an expert. And my promise to them is within a week, I'll find out why your project is marching towards death. We call it a death march. And then I'll stop the death march in a month. So 1 week to diagnose, 4 weeks to stop the death march. And then if you want me to fix the problem, I'll coach the people who are supposed to be running this for you. And sometimes what happens is they say, the CEO of the company or the person who brings me in will say, I don't want you to coach them, I just want you to run the project, which is also what I've done in the past. But when I do coach people, it is all about really basic things, which is don't be afraid to be absolutely candid. Communication, again, very key. Don't be afraid to be candid with people who keep telling you, all right, you said it's going to take you a year to do this, but we just changed the requirements. But can you just work hard and get this done in the same time? Don't say yes. Consider it. Ask for some time. Go back and say yes only if that's possible. Usually it's not possible, right? You also always have quality, you have cost, and then you have time. Two of these things, three things can happen. you'll always lose on one of these three. So you've got to balance these three things. So it's remarkable when you go into these situations, what you find people have become a victim of, which was they will either have said yes when they shouldn't have. They weren't paying attention to how requirements are being tracked. There was one project where I came in, again, 2.5 years late, for a very, very large brand across the US and Canada. And they had, count this, it's not just one or two sets of requirements. They had 26 different sets of requirements. And they were always bickering with the vendors that they had at the time, what was supposed to be implemented, because no one knew. There's always a different set of requirements for people to implement because there were 26. So the way I fixed that was I stopped all work on the project for a week, came up with one set of requirements in that week, and then we started again. 6 months later, we had the first delivery on that project, but it was stabilized. 1 week later, it was stable. 4 weeks later, we were delivering. So I coach people on what seem to be, when you distill them down, they're very basic ideas, but the basic ideas are very difficult to implement because you're so worried about either being fired, disappointing your boss. Sometimes people are not paying attention because there's so much happening, and that's because you haven't kind of coalesced around a small group of people who can feed you information. You're trying to get information for 20, 30 people at a time.
Right.
You'll never be able to do that. So there are just some management principles and good processes that I've been fortunate to learn myself that I'm able to tell people about. And it doesn't take that long. It takes probably anywhere between 1 week to 4 weeks to coach them.
So what's in your toolbox, right? You come in, projects are failing. There's a lot about project management there, and communication is failing. There is no candid communication. Either people are saying yes when they shouldn't, or the requirements are not being gathered the right way, and there are many communication points, and that's failing. And so this is where my question is going. There's a lot of discussion. I talk to a lot of people in the technology world about different processes and methodologies for project management, right?
Mhm.
And in the technology world, if you talk about PMI, waterfall type project management, it's like a bad word, right? People will look at you like, that's awful, you shouldn't do that. We do agile, right? Agile itself is becoming a bad word as well, right? Because agile has become an excuse, to just delay things, but doing, 2 week sprints, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there? And I tend to think that for the sake of agile, people have forgotten about scope management, something like a work breakdown structure, and having a structured mindset about how to look at requirements and big architecture. When you go and look at these projects, what toolbox do you use, and how do you look at that? How do you look at these things?
It ends up being quite basic. So you're right. Waterfall has become a bad word. Agile is kind of, there's another word called Scrum, right? Scrum is one of the other methodologies. And there's a related word, it's a joke, it's called Scrum But. Scrum But stands for, we do Scrum, but, and then you say, we change it like this, which just means that you're not disciplined enough to do something that's very, very basic and very, very disciplined. You have to change it. That means you're still going to fail. It's just going to be because you did Scrum But. So if always when you step back, the first thing you've got to look at is, what is it that you're trying to deliver? Is that quantifiable? Is that objective? Sometimes what you notice is the customer who's paying for this is going to be telling you, I don't know why my vendor isn't delivering. We are so clear, this is exactly what we wanted, and it's been so long. I don't know that we have the right vendor. Then you talk to the vendor, then they show you what the requirements are. And then you realize that between those two, the problem happened to be that a lot of the work is very visual. And I'm talking about actually a current client of ours. I'm not going to mention the name, but it's a world famous airline. A lot of the work is very visual. And when the work is visual, what ends up happening is it needs to be more beautiful. It needs to be more striking. It needs to have a comfortable look. These are words that people use, but how do you test that? How do you make it possible so that somebody can say, yes, the work's done? Because that's what you're focusing on at the end of the day. Your customer should be happy, right? But your customer should be happy based on work that they were able to define, and you help them define that work. And sometimes vendors or providers of skilled people are not really that good at helping their customers. They're more like order takers. So what we have done, what I've done in the past when things have been unclear, it could be, a requirement that's empirical, that's based on numbers, can also be unclear. But our objective is to say, if I had absolute clarity, how would I satisfy you, Mr. or Miss Customer? How would I satisfy you on this requirement? How would I come to you and say, I'm done? And you'd look at this requirement and you'd say, yes, I agree, you're done. That's actually something that's so basic that a lot of people, a lot of companies don't do. Because if you don't have complete test-driven requirements, test-driven development, test-driven deliveries, then what you're doing is you're shooting yourself in the foot even before you've begun.
Yeah.
So I always say requirements are great, but every requirement should be testable. Testable, and the entire purpose of testability is that your client should be able to say at the end of this test, I will know whether this passed or failed. So for example, let's go back to the same thing that I was talking about. How do you make something more beautiful? How do you make something fit the spirit? Again, very diffuse word. What you do is you use tools like Figma, right? So you come up with the design, the visual design with your customer, and there are visual design elements in this situation. You design what things should look like, if it's icons they're talking about, if it's spaces that they're talking about, if it is avatars that they are talking about. You come up with that design. Once that design is solidified and there's a visual representation of it, then you create the implementation of that, right? And if it matches the visual description, the visual design, then the customer is satisfied. So again, the lack of clarity is one of the biggest enemies of delivering projects on time and within budget, on schedule, all of those things. But the lack of clarity is not just the fault of a client. Lack of clarity is also when you are not able to communicate to the client that this is how I'm going to test your delivery for you. Let me help you come up with something that'll make you happy.
How deep do you go in documentation? We're talking acceptance criteria, right? Testability, acceptance criteria. We're talking about defining, okay, this is going to be done a month from now. And you said these words, beautiful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's define what those words mean, how we're going to test it. How far do you go in documenting that so that, there's no memory gaps when you are going to do the testing?
Yeah, I go as far as we need to make sure that if we went through these steps, that would make you happy. So when we're talking to the customer or the customer's product owner, representative, whoever that happens to be on the project, we say, this is what we'll deliver. And sometimes they will say to you, well, let me go back and talk to my boss or my bosses, because there's a, with very large companies, brand image also means a lot, right? So they will go back and they'll have an organizational meeting where they'll come back and say, well, this would need to change, which is perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, you make one person from the customer side responsible for that description, the acceptance criteria. You create those acceptance criteria in collaboration with them. And sometimes creating that it has taken us 6 months or more at times for visual elements with this client that I was talking about earlier. But that's perfectly fine because we had a delivery supposedly of that item 3-4 months ago. And we told them, so this is how you manage projects, right? We told them, unless you decide this is not deliverable. So we are not delaying the project. We didn't want to say you are delaying the project, but we are not delaying the project. But we'll do this at X time after you've given us the requirements. So that's how deep we go as deep as we need to make sure the client's going to be happy. And we need that before we start work on it.
Got it. So there's a lot of, when you go in, you go with eProxim and you go in a company and you start fixing problems. Within a week, you do an evaluation. Within a month, you are already changing the project is already moving in the right direction. That's a lot of change management. And I
It is.
imagine sometimes those organizations that you're getting are big. So what are the prerequisites for you to be able to succeed? Do you need support at the CEO level, board level? How do you make sure that when you're going to go in, you're going to get the support you need to effect change?
So the typical scenario is that the project is already late, right? So you've got people, and these tend to be visible projects. So for a large company, there might be a product that's supposed to be delivered. It's already late. They already know they're spending more money than they should have. Smaller companies, they have a large project from a very large customer, and they already know they cannot deliver. They don't have the expertise, or the expertise that they have has never delivered at that scale. So it tends to be the case. There's this saying that I read once, and I thought was both funny and very accurate. Nothing focuses your mind like the prospect of certain death, right? When you know this is going to be life or death, you're really focused. So in my case, when I go in, that has already that idea has already taken root in the minds of the executives who bring me in. They're either spending too much money, or they know that they're going to fail and it's not going to be a good situation for them. So I do have that support. And what ends up happening is the people that I talk to, the people I'm trying to coach, they already know that I have that level of support at the executive stakeholder level. So it's easy enough for me for that period of time. So you lose credibility very fast when in a pressure-oriented situation like this. If you're not delivering something that's measurable in a week, like you haven't stopped the bleeding in a week, if you haven't delivered a turnaround in a month, people will lose patience. They will start looking for other alternatives, which is why my focus is always on, if it is necessary to do that, let's stop what we are doing. Let's not just keep digging the hole. Let's focus on what can make the immediate, most leveraged change to kind of stop the bleeding. And then we take that time to regroup and see what we can do to turn this project around and start moving in the right direction. Sometimes that means you have to fire some people. Sometimes
Right.
it means I need to bring in people who have worked with me in the past and they are very trusted by me because, again, they work very much like me. Sometimes you just say that, your communications need to get better. You need to just go through the right processes. So there's the thing with experience again, and I this is what age brings you, right? You learn how not to make mistakes. That is almost more valuable than learning how to do new things. You learn how not to make mistakes that will cause you to lose a lot of time and a lot of money. And I think that ends up being part of what I'm able to do, because sometimes I can't even explain when I walk in what the solution is going to be. But you learn by making the many mistakes that I've made in the past. And I know, let me help you not make that mistake. It's going to be expensive for you.
Very good. And you are now running, you have been running for a while, a design company, JLB. Tell me more about that. What are you doing there? What's the purpose of that company and the type of work that you're doing?
So several years ago, what I realized was people in software, I'm going to say this because I'm one of those people. They're not very exciting people. They're just they don't really do exciting things. And I was getting a little tired of just talking about code, best practices, this process, that process. So I said, let me experiment with getting into a world that's kind of loosely connected with what I do, because we still need good design. Most software that we have does have an interface. It has a front end. But let me do work with a company that does design, and creates design for mobile applications, but also for things like, they do wireframes, they do website design, they do icons, illustrations for books, for posters, So all of these things. So I went and bought a company, and I would not recommend it to anyone. By the way, it's an expensive way of finding finding out that these are different worlds. But I managed to I managed to buy it with some hiccups. Right, I've had it for about 4 years now. 2019. Actually, it's going to be 5 years this year, and uh, it's what Design by JLB does right now, because we are going through this rebranding, reinvention exercise. And this is, what is the date today? It is the
14.
13th or 14th of March 2024. So about 11, 12 days ago, we started this process of rebranding, where what we do is we create packages, so productized design services. What that means is you have these companies that are complete design agencies that do great work, but this aspect of interacting with potential clients is a little problematic. Clients don't always know what they want. Clients don't know how much they're going to pay. And on the other side, on the design services company side, you have to negotiate with clients. You have to look at what their work is, and then you give them an estimate. So it's kind of a back and forth that takes a long time. What Design by JLB does is it has two packages of services. I'm not going to mention the price here because the pricing is on the website. It is design.jlbusa.com. But the idea is that you have two packages. You have unlimited design. You have access to a pool of designers, so world-class designers. Their work is visible both on the site and on design sites like Dribbble, like Awards, like Behance. And what you get is access to all of these designers for that set price. You can have, you send us your requirements within 48 hours for most of that work. We'll get you back a design that meets your requirements, and then you can ask us to do something again. That is, so the two packages are, you can have one request in the queue at any given time for one package. You can have two if you have more work at any given time for the other package. It's a subscription-based service that you can stop, pause at any time. So let's just say that you start your subscription, 5 days later, you realize you don't have any work for that month, you
Right.
pause, and then you start the next month or 2 months later. You don't lose your money. And you can cancel at any time, because obviously we don't want to have unsatisfied customers who don't like the work we've done. Which brings me to the last point. We will make changes. My team of designers are very proud of their work. So if you don't like what we do, we'll make changes until you're satisfied. So stand behind the quality. The price is not a risk. You can cancel anytime, you can pause at any time, and you have access to a team of world-class designers who will fix things to the point where they look like exactly what you want. Last item on that is, if you're an agency, like you have multiple clients, PR agency or a development company, and you want to do design for any one of your clients, the fee that we charge, the subscription we charge, that's not related to how many clients you have. You can bring multiple projects to us. They're all under the same subscription.
Very nice. A fresh approach, a productized service that otherwise can become kind of blurry. I love it. And so next question is related to this, but what drives you, right? When you're thinking about the week ahead, what motivates you when you think about work? What are the things that excite you the most?
Well, go back to something that I was talking to my friend from many, many years ago. She was at school with me, and I'm talking about the mid 80s now. And she and I met 2 or 3 months ago when I was visiting India. And she said, do you remember, other people were always talking about what they wanted to be when they grew up. Like someone wanted to be a doctor, an engineer. These are the two most popular professions in India. They're very stable. And I didn't remember I used to say this, but in my mind, I knew this is what I wanted. She said, you always wanted to make money. So, so that's what motivated me for a long time. Then I realized that, once you are comfortable in life financially, what motivates me right now is, it's a little bit of a vanity thing, but the fact that people recognize me right now as somebody who can come and solve their problem quickly. It's an expensive problem. I can solve that quickly. I do like the fact that I'm one of the few people who can do that. So that's one motivation. And I'm being open with you because a lot of people will say that they do it completely for the good of the world.
Right.
I sometimes do it because I have a little bit of an ego, just a little bit.
Everyone, Jayant, everyone has an ego.
Yeah.
Even the most altruistic people in the world,
Yes.
they are still proud that they are the ones doing. Ego is always there. So
This is
okay.
true. This is true. So and I try to be open about these reasons. So that is one, right? But the other part is I still am very interested. I'm still excited by the idea that technology can solve so many problems. So when a new device comes out, and you and I, we were talking about the recent headset that Apple brought out,
Right.
and how it's driving demand for some of the work that we do at Surreal. It's driving demand for some of the work we do at Design by JLB as well, because we do 3D design, 3D modeling as well, and that's also coming in now as connected to that device. But this idea that technology has changed so much, but it's still a huge differentiator in how you're able to deliver value to your customers, to yourself, to your own internal customers. That to me is still very interesting, still drives me. I still learn, I still code. Before this call, I was with a group of people who work with me at Surreal, and we were working on a pretty difficult project, and we're talking about how to solve a problem with code. So I learn how to code. I learn about new hardware, new software, new operating systems, AI. I'm learning how to create new models, language models. So I try to keep myself at the point where I don't become a dinosaur. I don't like being comfortable. I like being financially comfortable. I don't like being comfortable in my professional life. I make changes pretty regularly. And I think that keeps people overuse this term, but it keeps me young. It keeps my mind young. If you're not challenged, you're dying. And I'm not there yet.
Yeah, no, completely agreed. So is that, what technology gets you excited today? Is it AI? Is it the things that are happening with AR, a field that you're working so much on? What are the things that you go like, wow, 2024 is exciting because this and this is happening? I'm
very interested in how we can use AI, but AI is just one of those components. I'm going to tell you what the problem is because people don't have a solution yet. And I take these, I'm also a big believer in putting problems out so that people can solve them collaboratively. But one of the biggest problems with doing any work in 3D, the 3D world, so where then it needs to have a lot of GPU power to be able to render things that are convincing. One of the biggest problems is that those worlds are not easy to manipulate from outside the engine where they're being run, they're being executed. Right. And what that means is you need a program where all these assets that you have created, the 3D assets, are interacting. A game, for example, is being played, and there you have avatars who are sitting on sofas and they're talking to each other. But that was programmed by somebody in the game engine. Now, how do we make it possible so that people from outside the game engine can come in and change things easily? So it becomes a low code, no code version of what the game engine is able to do. Now, why is that important? The same reason so many low code, no code platforms have taken off, things like Zapier and Bubble.io on the website development side, Webflow, all of these things have become huge because they give business users a way to create business value without having to know how to code, right? Now, my expectation, and I can already see the world moving towards this, is you'll have your own avatar, right? You'll have your own 3D immersive reality, right? And it might be something that you rent from somebody for $10 a month, It might be something that you've built because you're a great designer, right? So you've created this 3D world for yourself. But at some point, what you want for all of these 3D, your avatar, your 3D world to do is to come together with other people and do what social media does. So what do you do in social media? You interact with other people, you
Yep.
talk to other people, you buy what other people recommend. You see what other people are doing in this what's called user-generated content, and when all of that comes together, you have an explosion of activity that is just it wasn't imaginable 10 years ago. We just didn't have that. So I think this is where 3D worlds are going to be 5 years from now, 3 years from now, because you'll be able to generate 3D content. You'll be able to manipulate it using no-code platforms. And I'm very interested in creating a no-code platform to get there.
Beautiful. You got me thinking. You got me thinking. It's like a nice representation. I was going to mention the film Ready Player One. I don't think it's going to be that one creates an apocalyptic kind version of what we're talking about. But
Yes.
basically, everyone becomes a creator, right? And
Yes.
everyone can really build, and that's exciting. That's a different thing, right? And that
It
takes
is.
out the boring stuff for non-technical people. And
Correct.
it feels like it's going that way, right? It feels like AI is going to, the whole interface is changing. We're going to talk more, do more science, etc., but not like syntaxes and coding old school is going away. I mean, when we talk
Yeah.
about, when you think about the future of work and even about let's narrow it down. What's the future of work for a software developer 10 years from now? Right? Is it coding old school, or is it more having more business acumen, understanding more of the holistic picture, and just building stuff with different methods?
I have actually a clear idea of what this is going to be. And I'm basing this on having been in this world now for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
Every 10 years, what I've noticed is people are building more complicated things, but the definition of who the software developer is, that changes, right? So
Right.
what used to be a software developer 10 years ago, so someone would, for example, code in Java and code with relational databases. Well, that kind of coding today, not the language, I'm not talking about Java and Oracle databases. I'm talking about the result of that. You
Yeah.
can do exactly that with the tools that are available today. And you don't need to be a technical person who understands a specific computer programming language or the syntax and semantics of a relational database. You can do all that with tools that are available. But the people who create those tools, right, they still need to be creating those tools. They still need to understand
Right.
whatever that language is, whatever the new language is. So, for example, GPUs. We have talked about GPUs a couple of times in this conversation. The new world where most of the technological advances are going to be made is based on what you can do in a GPU, and that's not just the representation. That's the programming that you can do with a GPU. So a GPU's great power is that you can have huge parallel computation take place on a GPU. And there's an instruction set. It's called CUDA, C-U-D-A. I'm talking specifically about NVIDIA. But that instruction set is the reason why you have so many things happening with AI, with GPUs. So that instruction set was very, very, what you call esoteric. It was something that not many people knew. But now what's happening is you're creating frameworks on top of that instruction set that make it easier for software developers to create applications that'll take advantage of one or multiple hundreds, thousands of GPUs, and they will create solutions, business systems that are completely based on things that didn't exist 10 years ago, but they will still be very, very technical. Software
Right.
developers will do things that are too technical for business users to understand, but what they will create will be used by business users.
So it's more for everyone at the end of the day.
I think it's always more for everyone. I mean, think about what's happening today. You are in the business, so demand for programmers hasn't died. I mean, no one's
Oh,
saying AI made it possible for me to not hire programmers. what they say is AI made it possible for me to do these things faster. So I need programmers to be able to, yeah, exactly, put that into my larger solution because I can
Yeah.
sell more, I can create more now.
So what's your advice for everyone that is listening? Young people, they are getting into technology, they are excited, and they look at the future and they go like, what's your advice? Like pretend your son or daughter is listening and they want to get into technology, but they go like, hey dad, what should I take, bear in mind as I get into technology?
So I tried to convince my daughter to go into technology, and she's just become a doctor. So she obviously did not take my advice. But what I've done, and it's actually great advice, what I've said to people who are not certain about their future, so they're trying to make up their mind, whether they are in a school in the US, they are somewhere in India, the UK. I always tell them, if you're not certain, go into something that's connected with computers, not necessarily with programming. So AI is great, data analytics is great, but go into a place where you need to understand technology and use it to be able to provide business value. Those things are not going to go away. You also need an open mind to be able to train yourself when a new area comes up. So obviously you need to be flexible that way. But everyone that I've given that advice to, going back now 30 years, all the way until last year, they all have jobs. They're all doing quite well in their lives, right? And a bunch of them have gone on to be, directors and VPs and COOs, CTOs. These are people who used to work with me 10, 20 years ago. So I think with technology, the world's big enough that if you're curious and if you work, you will get to a point where you're going to be, the world will take care of you, let's just say.
I think there's one phrase resonating in my mind and gets me excited in a good way. It's more for everyone, right? More for
Yes.
everyone, and we need not to forget that.
Yes.
Jayant, one last question to you. What do you do when you're not working?
I try to travel. So recently I've been traveling to this location where the airline is based. And that, because it's kind of almost on the other side of the world, it takes up a lot of my time. So I'm not able to travel as much to other places. But I like to travel to Europe. I like to travel to, I've been to South America a couple of times. I want to travel there some more. But that's my, I don't want to say passion, but that's something that interests me. I don't like going to the places where you kind of go to all the tourist spots. I
Right.
like to go somewhere and kind of just sit and enjoy myself. Kind of,
Discover a place.
yeah. Just take the local color and the local food, the local drinks. I like my like my cocktails and my local drinks.
Have you ever been to Uruguay?
I have never been to Uruguay. No.
Well, you are officially invited, and it's the perfect place to enjoy the vibe of a local place without feeling like you are in a very touristy place, right? It's like I don't know. I don't know what to compare it to, but it's a small, stable country with people that are very relaxed, very laid back, right? So you are officially invited. You have an
Thank
excuse
you.
to come, and I will
Thank you
show
very
you
much.
around.
Thank you
Um,
very much.
Jayant, this has been wonderful. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I certainly hope that we can do it again sometime.
It has been my complete pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.